The digital clock on the dashboard read 11:47 p.m. as I pulled into the driveway. The dim glow of the porch light barely illuminated the front steps, casting long, sharp shadows on the siding. Vanessa had insisted we keep that old light even after it flickered and buzzed like it belonged in a horror movie. She said it gave the place character. I killed the engine, letting the silence settle. The house was quiet, too quiet for Vanessa. She was the type to keep the TV blaring late into the night, claiming she needed background noise to think. But tonight, there was nothing. No flicker of the screen, no muffled dialogue. Then I noticed them, two pairs of shoes neatly lined up by the front door. One pair was hers, those leopard print flats she loved. The other was a man's, black and expensive looking, polished like they'd just come out of the box. A cold knot tightened in my stomach. I stepped out of the truck, the crunch of gravel beneath my boots echoing in the stillness. The front door was unlocked. Vanessa always locked the door at night, religiously. Inside, the faint hum of the refrigerator greeted me, but the air felt heavy, stifling. My footsteps seemed unnaturally loud on the hardwood as I crossed the living room. The bedroom door was ajar, a thin sliver of light spilling out into the hallway. I hesitated for a moment, my hand hovering over the doorframe. Voices drifted through the crack, soft, indistinct murmurs, and then a low, familiar laugh. Vanessa's laugh. I pushed the door open. Vanessa was sprawled across the bed. Her auburn hair fanned out like a crown against the pillow. Her silk nightgown barely covered her thighs. And beside her, propped on one elbow with a smug grin, was Tyler, the 20-something kid from 2 doors down. The room seemed to shrink. Vanessa scrambled upright, her face a mask of panic, but Tyler didn't flinch. He leaned back, arms crossed, the smirk never leaving his face. "Logan," Vanessa started, her voice pitched high. This isn't what it looks like." I clenched my fists. The words came out slow, deliberate. "Then explain what it is, Vanessa." She stammered, grasping for an excuse. "We were just talking." Tyler came over. "Talking?" I cut her off, my voice like gravel. "In bed? Half naked?" Tyler laughed, a low, condescending chuckle. "Relax, man. It's not that serious." I snapped my gaze to him, taking a step closer. "You think this is funny?" He shrugged, his grin widening. "Hey," she was bored. "Just filling in where you couldn't, old man." I could feel the blood pounding in my ears, my fists itching to wipe that smirk off his face. But I didn't give him the satisfaction of losing control. Not yet. I turned to Vanessa, who was frantically trying to cover herself with a blanket. "How long?" I demanded. "What?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "How long has this been going on?" She didn't answer, her eyes darting toward Tyler as if he might save her. He just stretched out, completely at ease, like he owned the place. I laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "You've got nothing to say, huh? Figures." Vanessa's face hardened, her panic shifting to defiance. "Maybe if you weren't so distant all the time, this wouldn't have happened." "Distant?" My voice rose, the anger breaking through. "I work 12-hour shifts to keep a roof over your head, and this is what I come home to?" Tyler stood, towering over the bed, his confidence radiating like a challenge. "Look, man, if you're gonna yell, take it outside. Vanessa and I have plans for the night." That was it. I stepped forward, but Vanessa jumped between us, her hands on my chest, trying to push me back. "Logan, stop. Just leave. Please." I stared at her, her wide, pleading eyes, her hands trembling against me. Then I looked past her to Tyler, his smirk faltering for the first time. "You're not worth it," I growled, stepping back. I turned and walked out, slamming the door behind me. But this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat at the kitchen table with a bottle of whiskey and a notebook, piecing together the mess Vanessa had made of our lives. My hand clenched the glass tighter with every thought, every memory of her sweet lies and empty promises. Morning came, the light filtering in through the blinds, but it didn't bring clarity, just more anger. By the time I left for work, my mind was a storm of plans and questions, all circling back to one person, Tyler. Tyler Peterson, the kid from 2 doors down who'd moved back in with his parents after dropping out of college. I remembered his cocky strut, the way he'd flash his bright white grin like he thought the world owed him something. Diane, his mother, had once told me he was finding himself in my wife, apparently. I couldn't shake the image of him lounging in my bed like he belonged there. It burned in my mind, fueling a fire I couldn't put out. But before I made any moves, I needed to know everything. That evening, I parked a few houses down and watched their place. The Petersons' house was smaller than ours but well kept. Diane was a sweet woman, always trimming her hedges and waving to everyone. Tyler's dad, Doug, was quiet, usually busy tinkering with his old truck. And Tyler? Tyler spent his time doing God knows what. Around 7, I saw him leave the house. He hopped into his shiny black sports car, revving the engine just loud enough to piss off the neighbors, and took off down the street. I followed at a distance. He drove like he owned the road, cutting corners and gunning it at yellow lights. I trailed him to the strip mall on the edge of town, where he pulled into the parking lot of a dingy sports bar. Inside, it was dark and loud, the smell of stale beer and fried food clinging to the air. Tyler was easy to spot, leaning against the bar, flirting with the bartender like he didn't have a care in the world. I took a seat at a table in the corner, keeping my eyes on him. He stayed there for an hour, drinking and chatting up anyone who would listen. But it wasn't his social life I cared about. It was Vanessa. When I got home, I started digging into Vanessa's past. I needed to understand who she'd become when I wasn't looking. Flashbacks of our early days hit me like a punch to the gut. Vanessa was magnetic back then, confident, flirtatious, with a smile that could disarm anyone. She loved being the center of attention, basking in compliments like they were sunlight. I'd always thought it was harmless, part of her charm. But now, those memories felt tainted. I remembered the nights she stayed out late with her friends, the mysterious phone calls she'd dismiss with a laugh, saying, "It's just work stuff, babe." I remembered the way she'd check her reflection in every shiny surface, her lips always curled in that coy smile. Maybe this wasn't her first betrayal. Maybe I'd been blind all along. I grabbed her laptop, scrolling through her emails, her social media accounts. Most of it was mundane. Work emails, shopping receipts, harmless exchanges with friends. But then I found it. A folder buried in her email, labeled personal. Inside were photos, selfies she'd sent to Tyler, some of them barely decent. My blood boiled as I scrolled through their messages, the way she flirted and teased him, the way he called her, my naughty girl. There was no doubt now. This wasn't a one-time mistake. This was a choice. I didn't confront her that night. Instead, I sat in the dark, planning. Vanessa had made a fool of me, and Tyler thought he could walk into my house and take what was mine. They were both about to learn a hard lesson. The next evening, I got home earlier than usual. Vanessa was in the kitchen, stirring something on the stove like nothing had happened. She was wearing one of her tight-fitting dresses, the kind she knew I liked, as if playing the part of the doting wife could erase the mess she'd made. "Dinner's almost ready," she said over her shoulder, her voice too sweet, too practiced. I didn't respond. I set my bag down and walked into the kitchen, watching her closely. She felt my stare and turned, her smile faltering for a split second. "You're quiet tonight," she said, trying to sound casual. I leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "Where's Tyler?" Her hand froze mid-stir, the spoon hovering over the pot. "What are you talking about?" "Don't play dumb, Vanessa. Where's your boyfriend?" Her eyes darted to the clock, her fingers gripping the spoon tightly. "Logan, I told you. It's not what you think. Tyler's just—" "Stop," I said, my voice sharp. "I saw the pictures. The messages. Don't insult me with more lies." Her face went pale, the color draining from her cheeks. For a moment, she looked like she might cry, but then she straightened her back, her lips curling into a defensive sneer. "Fine," she snapped. "Yes, I've been seeing him. But can you blame me? You're never here. You don't pay attention to me anymore." I stared at her, stunned by the sheer audacity of her words. "So this is my fault?" "You're always working," she shot back. "Always tired. always distant. What did you expect me to do? Sit around and wait for you to notice me? My jaw tightened, but I kept my voice calm. I expected you to act like a decent human being, not sneak around with a kid who still lives with his parents. Her face flushed with anger now. At least he makes me feel alive. He listens to me, he. Enough, I barked, cutting her off. The doorbell rang, and we both froze. Vanessa's eyes widened, her panic clear. Don't, she started, but I was already moving toward the door. I opened it to find Tyler standing there, his signature smirk plastered across his face. He didn't even have the decency to look uncomfortable. Evening, old man, he said, leaning casually against the doorframe. Get in, I growled, stepping aside. Tyler walked in, looking around like he owned the place. Nice setup you've got here. Vanessa's been telling me about all the hard work you put into it. Shame you can't enjoy it more. I shut the door, the sound echoing through the house. Vanessa appeared in the hallway, her face a mixture of anger and fear. Tyler, you shouldn't have come here, she hissed. Why not? He said, grinning. Your husband invited me in. I stepped closer, looming over him. You think this is a joke? You come into my house, sleep with my wife, and now you want to mock me? Tyler shrugged, his grin never faltering. Hey, she came to me. Don't take it personally. Vanessa stepped between us, her hands up. Logan, stop. Let's just talk about this, okay? I pulled my phone from my pocket, holding it up. You want to talk? Let's start with this. I pressed play on one of the recordings I'd saved, the audio of their conversations. Tyler's voice filled the room, saying things I'd rather not hear again, followed by Vanessa's giggling responses. Her face turned crimson, and Tyler's smirk finally slipped. You recorded us? Vanessa hissed, her voice shaking with fury. I wanted the truth, I said simply, and now I have it. Tyler took a step back, trying to regain his cocky composure. Look, man, this is between you and her. I'm just the guy she called when she got bored. I stared him down, my fists clenching. Get out. What? You heard me. Get out of my house before I do something we'll both regret. Tyler glanced at Vanessa, who avoided his gaze. For the first time, he looked unsure of himself. After a tense moment, he walked to the door. Whatever, man. She's not worth this much drama. When the door slammed behind him, I turned back to Vanessa. This isn't over, I said coldly. Not by a long shot. She crossed her arms, glaring at me with a mix of anger and defiance. Do whatever you want, Logan. You're not scaring me. I didn't respond. I just walked past her, already planning my next move. The next morning, I woke up early, long before Vanessa stirred. The house felt colder somehow, as if her betrayal had seeped into the walls. I moved silently through the house, gathering what I needed to begin my plan. The first step was simple, proof. Not just for me, but for anyone who might doubt the story I'd soon tell. I stopped at a hardware store after work and picked up a few small, discreet cameras. They'd be easy to hide, one in the bedroom, one in the living room, and one near the front door. I wasn't taking any chances with Vanessa slipping Tyler into the house while I was gone. By the time I got home that evening, Vanessa had reverted to her perfect wife act. She greeted me at the door with a forced smile and a plate of reheated leftovers. How was work? She asked, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. Busy, I replied curtly, brushing past her. She followed me into the living room, watching as I set my things down. Are we just not going to talk about what happened? I turned to face her, keeping my expression blank. What's there to talk about? You've made your choices, Vanessa. Now I'm making mine. Her eyes narrowed, her facade cracking for a moment. You're being ridiculous. I told you it didn't mean anything. He's just a distraction. I laughed bitterly. A distraction? You don't get to call it that after sneaking around behind my back. She tried again, softening her voice. Logan, I know I messed up, but we can fix this. You don't have to throw everything away over one mistake. I stared at her, the image of her in bed with Tyler flashing through my mind. One mistake? That's what you're calling it. Her lips parted like she wanted to argue, but she didn't. Instead, she turned and walked away, slamming the bedroom door behind her. Once the house was quiet, I got to work. I positioned the cameras carefully, making sure they were hidden but had clear views of the key areas. I tested them with my phone, watching the live feed as I adjusted the angles. The next few days were a waiting game. I acted as normal as I could, pretending to buy into Vanessa's attempts to smooth things over. She seemed convinced I was letting it go, but the cameras told a different story. While I was at work, Tyler came over twice. Both times, he slipped in through the back door like a cockroach, staying for an hour or two before slinking out. I watched the footage each night, my rage simmering as I saw them laughing, kissing, and doing things that made my stomach turn. By the end of the week, I had everything I needed: video clips, messages, and audio recordings, all neatly organized and time-stamped. I called Ethan, my oldest friend, and asked him to come over. Ethan was the kind of guy who didn't ask a lot of questions, but always had your back. When I told him the basics, his face darkened. "Vanessa and that little punk? You're kidding me," he said, pacing the living room. "I wish I was," I said, handing him my phone. He scrolled through the evidence, his jaw tightening with every swipe. "This is bad, Logan. Real bad." "I know. What are you gonna do?" I leaned back in my chair, staring at the screen. "Expose them. Publicly." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "You sure that's the way to go? It's gonna get messy." "Good," I said, my voice cold. "Messy is exactly what they deserve." Ethan nodded slowly. "All right. If you're sure, I'm with you. Whatever you need." That night, I sat in front of my computer, piecing together the video. The footage was damning. Vanessa and Tyler sneaking around, laughing at my expense, talking about how clueless I was. By the time I finished, it was nearly dawn. I uploaded the file to a secure cloud account, double-checking everything before shutting the laptop. This wasn't just about exposing them. It was about taking back control, about making sure they couldn't twist the narrative to make me the villain. As I climbed into bed, I glanced at Vanessa, who was sleeping soundly, completely unaware of what was coming. Her lies had gotten her this far, but not anymore. The truth was coming, and it was going to hit her like a freight train. The day started like any other, but I knew it wouldn't end that way. I had spent the morning perfecting my plan, reviewing the evidence, and preparing for the fallout. The air outside was brisk, the kind of cold that clung to your skin and reminded you that winter wasn't far off. It was fitting, given what was about to happen. By mid-afternoon, I had everything ready. I sent the video to a group chat that included neighbors, family, and a few of Vanessa's friends, people who had seen us as the perfect couple. I made sure to attach a short message. "This is what I've been dealing with. Thought you should all know." The fallout began almost immediately. My phone buzzed nonstop with calls and texts. Some were sympathetic, others were shocked, and a few were downright furious. Not at me, but at Vanessa. I sat back and let it unfold, sipping coffee as I watched the messages roll in. Then Diane called. "Logan, what is this?" Her voice was sharp, the kind of tone only a furious mother could manage. "It's exactly what it looks like," I said evenly. She was silent for a moment, then hissed, "That boy of mine is going to regret ever being born." By the time Vanessa got home, the storm was in full swing. She walked through the door, her usual air of confidence replaced with something frantic. Her phone buzzed in her hand, the screen lighting up with message after message. "What the hell did you do, Logan?" she spat, slamming the door behind her. "I told the truth," I said, leaning against the kitchen counter. "You had no right." "No right?" I barked, stepping closer. "You lied to me, cheated on me, and humiliated me. And now you think I don't have the right to defend myself?" Her face twisted in fury. "You're blowing this out of proportion. It was just—" "Don't say it was just a mistake, Vanessa," I interrupted. "I have the footage. I have the messages. This wasn't a mistake. It was a choice. Over and over again." She froze, the fight in her eyes dimming as she realized she had no defense. Then came the knock on the door. I opened it to find Diane standing there, her face a storm cloud of anger. Behind her, Tyler stood awkwardly, his usual cocky grin replaced with a sheepish look. "Get your ass out here," Diane snapped, grabbing him by the arm and dragging him inside. Vanessa's face went pale. Diane, I can explain. Don't even try, Diane cut her off. You've humiliated your husband, my family, and this entire neighborhood. Tyler tried to interject. Mom, it's not that big of a... She spun on him, her eyes blazing. Don't you dare finish that sentence. I've had enough of your excuses. The room was dead silent for a moment, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Then Diane turned to me, her expression softening slightly. Logan, she said, her voice steady, I'm sorry for what my son has done. I don't know how you put up with this for so long. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. Diane hauled Tyler out of the house, her grip like iron. You're coming home right now, and we're having a long talk about your future. Vanessa stood there, her face flushed with humiliation. She looked at me, her eyes pleading. Logan, we can fix this? I laughed bitterly. Fix it? You think there's anything left to fix? Her shoulders slumped, and for the first time, she looked truly defeated. That night, I packed up her belongings, tossing them into garbage bags. By the time I was done, the front lawn looked like a yard sale of shame. I changed the locks and put a note on the door. Your things are outside. Don't come back. I sat on the porch with a beer, watching the bags sway in the wind. Vanessa didn't come back that night. The morning was crisp, the kind of cold that stings your lungs when you breathe too deeply. I stood at the front window, sipping my coffee as the first rays of sunlight painted the street in muted gold. Vanessa's things were still scattered across the lawn, untouched. A part of me had expected her to slink back in the dead of night to gather them, but it seemed even she wasn't shameless enough to face me again so soon. As I watched, a car pulled up, Diane's old sedan. She stepped out, her jaw set, and marched up to the lawn. Logan, she called, not bothering with pleasantries. I opened the door and stepped out onto the porch. Morning, Diane. She glanced at the bags and boxes strewn across the grass, then back at me. I told Tyler to clean this up, but as you can see, he's too much of a coward to face you. I shrugged. Not my problem anymore. Diane sighed, running a hand through her graying hair. I don't know where I went wrong with that boy. I raised him better than this. Her voice cracked slightly, but she held herself together. I'm sorry, Logan, for everything. You didn't deserve this. I nodded. I appreciate that, Diane, but I'm done cleaning up after them. She gave a weak smile, then started gathering the bags. I'll deal with it. God knows they've left enough messes for the rest of us to clean up. Vanessa showed up later that afternoon, just as I expected. She always hated being humiliated, and I knew she wouldn't let the neighborhood gossip linger without at least trying to save face. She pulled up in her car, her sunglasses hiding whatever emotions she might have been feeling. She stepped out cautiously, scanning the street like she was afraid the neighbors were watching. Logan, she started, her voice trembling slightly. Can we talk? I leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. Talk about what? She hesitated, fiddling with the strap of her purse. I know I messed up, okay? But this doesn't have to end like this. We can figure it out. We've been through worse. Worse? I repeated, my voice cold. You really think this compares to anything we've been through before? She stepped closer, lowering her sunglasses to look me in the eye. I'm sorry, Logan. I was stupid. I was selfish, but I still love you. I laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. Love? You don't know the first thing about love, Vanessa. If you did, we wouldn't be here. Her composure cracked then, her lower lip trembling. Please, Logan, don't do this. We can fix it. We can go to counseling, or... I held up a hand, cutting her off. Stop. You made your choice, Vanessa. You don't get to undo it just because the consequences are catching up to you. Her face twisted in desperation. You're really going to throw everything away over one mistake? I stepped closer, my voice low and steady. You didn't just make a mistake. You lied, you cheated, and you laughed about it behind my back. There's nothing left to throw away. She opened her mouth to argue, but I slammed the door in her face. The rest of the day passed quietly. Diane came by again to pick up the last of the bags, shaking her head at the mess her son and Vanessa had made. I don't know how you're holding it together, she said as she loaded the last box into her trunk. Barely, I admitted. She gave me a small, sad smile. Well, if you ever need anything, you know where I am. That night, I sat on the couch, a cold beer in hand, and stared at the divorce papers I'd picked up that morning. They were blank, just waiting for my signature to set everything in motion. Vanessa and Tyler had thought they could walk all over me, but they were wrong. I wasn't going to let them dictate my life any longer. I picked up the pen and signed my name with a steady hand. The reckoning was complete. The next morning, I slid the signed divorce papers into an envelope and sealed it with a finality that felt like exhaling after holding my breath too long. The courthouse wasn't far, and the short drive gave me time to reflect on how far things had spiraled. Betrayal had a way of making the world seem smaller, more suffocating. But this was freedom. The clerk behind the counter barely looked up as she processed the papers. She stamped the forms, slid me a copy, and told me it was done. Just like that, years of marriage reduced to ink and bureaucracy. I walked out of the courthouse feeling lighter. The November air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of decaying leaves, and for the first time in weeks, I noticed the world around me. The next few days passed in a blur. Word of Vanessa's betrayal spread quickly, and the social backlash was harsher than I'd expected. Friends, neighbors, even her coworkers began to distance themselves. Diane came by one last time to apologize again, but I could tell the weight of Tyler's actions had worn her down. He's staying with his dad for a while, she said, shaking her head. I told him he's not welcome back until he grows up. I nodded. You're doing the right thing. She paused, then looked me in the eye. Logan, if there's anything I can do, you've done enough, Diane. I appreciate it. Vanessa tried to reach out a few more times, but I didn't answer. She left voicemails, pleading for another chance, and I deleted each one without listening all the way through. One evening, as I was packing up her remaining things, Ethan stopped by with a six-pack. You finally done with all this? He asked, nodding at the boxes stacked in the corner. Almost, I said, cracking open a beer. He leaned against the counter, his expression serious. Good. It's time you stopped letting her take up space in your head. I know, I said. She's not worth it. Ethan smirked. Damn right she's not. With Vanessa gone, the house felt different, emptier. Sure, but not in a bad way. It was quiet, peaceful, like I finally had room to breathe. I started making small changes, rearranging furniture, painting the walls. It wasn't just about making the house my own. It was about reclaiming my life. I sold that bed, and bought a new one. Tossing the old mattress felt like shedding a second skin, leaving behind every tainted memory. Diane reached out again a few weeks later, this time to apologize for Tyler's behavior in person. I don't expect you to forgive him, she said, her voice heavy with regret. But I want you to know he's not getting away with this. His father and I are making sure he faces the consequences. I nodded, appreciating her effort. I don't blame you, Diane. You're not the one who did this. She smiled faintly. Maybe not, but I still feel responsible. If you ever need anything, you know where to find me. One afternoon, as I was clearing out the last of Vanessa's clutter, I came across an old photo album buried in the back of the closet. It was filled with pictures from happier times, our wedding, vacations, lazy Sundays on the couch. I flipped through it for a while, then closed it and set it aside. Those moments were gone, and I wasn't going to cling to them anymore. By the end of the month, the house was unrecognizable. New paint, new furniture, a new energy. I threw a small gathering for a few close friends, including Ethan, to celebrate my fresh start. As we sat around the fire pit in the backyard, Ethan raised his beer. To Logan, he said, for coming out of this mess stronger than ever. I clinked my bottle against his, a small smile playing at my lips. Damn right. The next morning, I stood on the porch, looking out at the quiet street. The leaves were gone now, the trees bare against the gray sky. Winter was coming, but for the first time in years, I felt ready for it. I'd been through hell, but I'd come out the other side. Stronger, sharper, and free. This was my life now, and I wasn't letting anyone take it from me again. Subscribe so you don't miss new stories on the channel.